Hey, it's Drybear. Back again with our Diablo 4 build guide, and today we'll be talking about the Steel Cyclone Barbarian. The two strongest and most viable builds for Barbarian right now with early testing is Whirlwind and Bleed, and you can even mix and match both of those to have a Whirlwind Bleed or Bleed primary with Whirlwind second to give a very powerful build. So if you're a meta chaser and you like having the strongest build, this is definitely one of them. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. If you don't come hang out with me in the community on Twitch, then the next time you get a legendary item, it's going to be an exact copy of the one you already have. As you may have guessed, this is a Whirlwind-focused build. And what's fun about Whirlwind in this game, just like it is with any Diablo game, is that when the build is optimized, you can get to perfect uptime on Whirlwind. And there's actually a lot of really cool ways you can modify it inside of the Paragon board. And when you add in things like Bleed and Berserking, which you can scale up even better, you get some insane bonuses. And there's also a unique item for Barbarian that makes your Whirlwinds explode when they're all done. So you can spawn tornadoes, dust devils, you can suck them in, big explosions. It's such a fun build to just spin to win all the way to victory. As always, you know I have your guys' back, so a full build sheet. I have built this on d4builds.gg. It'll be linked down below in the description. So if you're looking to use the Steel Cyclone build, this will give you a point of reference. There's always ways you can min-max it for your own playstyle and how you function. We're gonna go through all of the pieces here, including gear and skills, legendaries, ancients, the skill tree all the way down from the top to the bottom, as well as a first pass on what I think is a good Paragon board for the Whirlwind build, the Steel Cyclone build for launch. Let's start, as we always do, with the builder, the top of the tree. The thing is, as you get further and further into the game, you have less and less need for Fury generation, especially if you run 3 shouts like I recommend with this build. You'll actually be able to generate a stupid amount of Fury. There's even things in the Paragon board and in your gear that can make it so spending Fury gives you more damage, spending Fury heals you, spending Fury gives you Fortify, and so you start getting to this point where you're just unstoppable, and you can, thankfully, you can spin to win indefinitely until you have to stop and cast something, which is really, really cool. But to get the build going, we start with Frenzy. I think this one fits the best. There isn't really any major benefit to using others, and the reason we like this one is that you get increased attack speed, which is nice for us overall. You can also get bonus attack speed and generate extra Fury. So especially when you're leveling, if you decide to level with this build, it helps you bridge the gap and gain that Fury up. On top of that, a modifier for Frenzy, which is super sexy. While berserking, your other skills besides Frenzy gain attack speed for each stack of Frenzy that you have. So you build up the stacks of Frenzy, you get that extra attack speed, but when you proc Berserking, which we will with our ultimate, then you'll get bonus attack speed on your other abilities, namely Whirlwind. Pretty cool stuff to get some scaling there. It shouldn't come as any surprise that our core skill choice here is going to be Whirlwind. This is our big star of the show, the spotlight for this build. You spin in a circle and you do damage. You can get Fury. When you gain each Fury, you deal damage with Whirlwind, so it gives you Fury back. And against elite enemies, you get even more Fury back, which is nice. This kind of just helps give the upkeep that while you're spinning with Whirlwind, you can generate some Fury. And then we also want to get the one that after you're Whirlwinding for at least 2 seconds, Whirlwind deals increased damage until you stop. So you're incentivized to do Whirlwind for as long as possible until you have to use your other abilities, or you have to reposition or cancel or do something like that. So you want to keep your Whirlwind going for as long as possible. We do that by running a 2-hand weapon focus for this. Endless Fury is great for this. Basic skills generate more Fury when using a 2-handed weapon, so we're going to use that for Frenzy. By the way, if you didn't know, for the passive for Barbarians, they can have a full arsenal of weapons equipped, unlike any other class in the game. And you can also, on the skill itself inside of the game, you can tell the game what weapon you want each ability to use. Even if it's an ability like Frenzy, which is naturally a dual-wielding thing, you can force things to use a specific weapon. So like for Whirlwind, you can tell it that you want to use a bludgeoning weapon or a slashing weapon, that sort of thing. But you will need dual-wield weapons equipped for this, and you will be able to gain benefits and legendaries and stats from having the extra weapons equipped as well. So that's pretty cool. So we got extra Fury generation for Frenzy. That's going to give us attack speed. When we Berserk, we get even more attack speed on things that aren't Frenzy. And we've got our Whirlwind. Next, what we're going to pick up is 3 different shouts. Shouts right now are actually pretty busted. They're insanely strong. It makes Barbarian probably the best class to have in a group setting. I think Barbarian and Druid are so very good, not only good on their own, but also exceptionally good in group because they have insane buffing bonuses. So we're going to pick up all 3 of these shouts. Rallying Cry is kind of like the Blood Howl of Barbarian, where you get a resource for it, which is nice. But when you activate this, it's just a basic cooldown. You get increased movement speed and resource generation, and nearby allies get it as well, which is really cool. You get Unstoppable while it's active, which means you can't be slowed or CC'd. And then you also make it so that Rallying Cry generates Fury and grants you additional resource generation. So you want to have this up, and with cooldown reduction and Paragon, you can actually keep this up most of the time. Challenging Shout is your other shout. Taunt nearby enemies and gain damage reduction. It's actually quite a lot of damage reduction when you make it all the way up to max. You can make it so that you gain maximum life when you do it, and while it's active, you gain 3 Fury each time you take damage. So that's kind of the big thing there. You can force mobs to attack you with the taunt, and then as you're being attacked, you gain Fury. You also get Fury generation from Rallying Cry. When you activate Rallying Cry, it gives you Fury. You also generate more Fury with your Frenzy, and you can share the attack speed bonus with others. You can also pick up things like additional max life in here. You can also do damage reduction for elites. There's some nice passives in here. We don't need anything from this, and we're definitely not going to be picking up either of these defensives because really we just have our spin to win, and that's all we care about. Coming down into the next part of the tree, we're going to get the 3rd shout in the kit, Warcry. Bellow Warcry, increase your damage dealt by 15%. If you skip on some of these passives, it's not terrible to scale this. What goes up with Warcry is the damage dealt scaler, the damage amp, which is pretty good. You'll be able to keep it up, and especially in a party, it can be super valuable. Remember that all of these can give you bonuses for people in your party, and we'll get to a second why that gets even better. But we're also going to get Berserking for 4 seconds, which is super easy. Remember that we get Berserking. Keep in mind that Berserking comes from doing Warcry, but also while we're Berserking, all of our skills gain attack speed, not just Frenzy. And keep in mind that we have Berserking from Warcry and our ultimate, which later on when we talk about Paragon board and gear, being Berserk is going to give us some pretty significant bonuses. We also want to make it so that if at least 6 enemies are nearby when you cast Warcry, your damage bonus is increased by another 10%. And again, if you decide to put more points in Warcry here other than just 1, you can get even more damage amp for that. But the reason running 3 shouts is so good, and why most Barb builds are going to run 2 to 3, especially if you're in a party or if you're going for like a support Barbarian, is because of these passives in this tree. Your shout skill effect durations are increased by 24%. That will affect all 3 of your shouts. Every single one of them, when you put points in this, benefits from it. So having more shouts makes this node more valuable. On top of that, your shout skills cause enemies to deal less damage for 5 seconds. So you can actually stagger these, keep high uptime, but hit it, wait a couple seconds, hit the next one, wait a couple seconds, hit the next one, and you'll be able to get just global damage reduction. And that works for you and for people in your party, which is awesome. We can also pick up movement speed in here, which is nice for Whirlwind because we're always moving and it's nice to be able to move through. We do have Unstoppable in this build as well, which is really nice. So Unstoppable plus movement speed means you can just zoom around to your heart's content, which is really good. Coming down to the next one, because we picked up 2 in the defensive and we have 1 in every other tree, there's going to be a tree that has to sacrifice something, and it's going to be all the way down here to this second to last tree here. You don't really need Rupture. You're not going to do anything with Death Blow, and you're not going to want to stop your Whirlwind to do Steel Grasp. So obviously, your goal is to maximize Whirlwind uptime. You don't need any of these abilities that will take you out of Whirlwind. It's not going to get any benefit there. But there is some free damage here for close enemies. Most of the time, you're going to be in close. Keep in mind that we're still going to be spawning Dust Devils all the time and exploding, so some of those enemies might count as distant, but for the most part, especially on bosses, the enemy will be in close range, which is just some free damage to pick up along the way. Going down to the ultimate tree, there's a bunch of interesting passives here and some flexibility in how you choose this, but because we get so many benefits from Berserking, we're going to want to pick up Wrath of the Berserker. You activate it, you knock back enemies, you enter Berserking, you gain Unstoppable. For the next 10 seconds, dealing direct damage with basic skills grants Berserking for 5 seconds. So not only do you get it from your Warcry as an activation, but you can also get it from your Wrath of the Berserker. And there's ways to extend this. And there's also nodes in the Paragon board that give you increased Berserking duration as a % scalar. And so I haven't been able to get level 100 with Whirlwind build, so I can't tell you for sure, but it's very possible that you can get perfect 100% uptime with Berserking, Frenzy, and all of your shouts at all times while you're whirlwinding. I'm not sure yet, but you can get pretty damn close even without having a perfect build. So Wrath of Berserker is there. We're going to upgrade it because while it's active, we get movement speed and fury generation, which is nice. We also have Supreme Wrath of Berserker. While it's active, every 50 fury you spend increases Berserk's damage bonus by 25%. So you get even more bonus out of that, and we can keep high uptime with Berserk as well. A bunch of juicy passives exist in this tree here that you can pick from. You can also, you don't want to go for one-handed, but there's like two-handed options here. The one that I would definitely get is bludgeoning weapons deal increased damage if the enemy is vulnerable. We will be focusing on using a two-hand bludgeon for our whirlwind. As I mentioned earlier, we want to have a two-hand bludgeon attached to this. So anything that works on bludgeoning or on two-hand is going to give us a nice bonus. So this one means that we deal damage against enemies that are vulnerable. There's some passives that you can pick up around here as well. You have chance to cause vulnerable. This one is probably better before you get your full build online. There's other ways to proc vulnerable, but this one is another one to add on top of it. So getting pressure point, if you want to move around some points here, you can even pull points out of some of your shouts and then put that into your lucky hit to get vulnerable. But you do want damage amp on the target because you also get it so your bludgeoning weapons deal increased damage if the enemy is vulnerable. So even more bonus there. You also have an option to do two-handed weapons deal increased crit damage. You're not going to have crazy crit strike, but you will have some. Plenty of dexterity in the Paragon, plus crit bonuses from other buffs and benefits. So this one actually heavy-handed can be quite good. Concussion is also an interesting option as well. Skills using bludgeoning weapons are Whirlwind, have up to 10% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds, or up to 15% chance when using a two-handed bludgeoning. And you can actually just make this all the way up to 30% and 45%, depending on how you want to spend those points in your passive. Some really cool options there. The next one that you definitely want is Invigorating Fury. Heal for 9% of your max life for each 100 Fury that you spend. Our Fury generation with all 3 shouts going is ridiculous. It's actually stupid how high your Fury can go. But also, anytime you spend Fury, which we're spending constantly, you're always healing yourself. It's really, really good for a resource-hungry build like this. And then we put 1 point in Tempered Fury because we have to in order to get to Invigorating Fury there down at the bottom. Then last, there's only 4 choices here for Barbarian, and there's one that's a clear winner because, well, we're using Whirlwind, which is a core skill. So you can bet that Unbridled Rage, which makes core skills deal 135% increased damage, but cost 100% more Fury. Awesome pickup here. Almost all of our damage is done through a core skill. So this just gives us a very global damage scaler on top of that. And since it costs more Fury, benefits that we get from spending Fury are a lot easier to reach, which is pretty cool overall. So that's where we're at for the skill tree. For your technique for Barbarian, you get the chance to choose a specialization for what weapon you want to focus on. Again, because 95% of our damage comes, well, maybe less with bleeding, but maybe 80 to 90% of our damage comes from a skill that uses two-handed expertise. We want to use two-handed expertise as our option. What this does is you have a lucky hit chance, a proc chance to gain Fury when hitting an enemy, and you double the amount of Fury gained while berserking. So when we have high berserking, bada boom, bada bing, we get even more. When you get super late game and you can actually rank up your passive effects, you can also make this so you deal increased crit damage to vulnerable enemies while berserking, which again gives us even more value. So you want to pick up for technique, you want to get two-hand bludgeoning for that bonus there. For gems, it's pretty straightforward. Crit damage to vulnerable enemies, especially if you are running with the vulnerable procs in Paragon and you're running with pressure point, you can get a very high uptime on vulnerable. And then doing that means that you get more crit damage, which is nice. Max life is huge here because you're always healing for, when you look at things like Invigorating Fury down here, it's a percentage of your max life that you heal for. So the higher your max life is, the more value you get from that. And we're in melee range a lot, so I recommend getting armor for your jewelry gems. Now let's go through the gear set options here. There's actually a lot of flexibility in how you play this. There's like 5 or 6 of these that you really need to have in the build. There's actually some pretty interesting choices on how you would fill in the gaps otherwise. So there's some pretty cool things there. We'll start with what I think is one of the best uniques for this build, which is going to be Gore's Devastating Grips. Again, I like including uniques in my builds because it's something to look forward to. No, you will not be able to get this right away. You'll have to work towards it, but it's something to think about as it's coming down the pipe. Like, eventually I'll be able to have this, and that's cool to think about, and it gives me a goal and something to work towards, and it tells you what the synergy options are for that build. So Gore's Devastating Grips is the item I told you about at the beginning of the video. Whirlwind explodes after it ends, dealing 70% of the total base damage dealt to surrounding enemies as fire damage. So you get this big long tornado. If you ever have to cancel it, it pops and does a bunch of AoE damage. Super fun, super cool. And we're also gonna be running with things that give us Dust Devils and AoEs and things like that. All of this runs really well together, and you're basically a walking cyclone, just destroying everything in sight. Super cool. For the most intense and highly contentious slots, right? Your most valuable legendaries are always going to be your weapon slots, your rings, and your amulet. That's where your biggest ones come from. So you always want to look at those as part of your highest build definition. We looked at Dust Devil's aspect. This is an option that I think you can put on for dual wielding. Whirlwind leaves behind Dust Devils that deal damage. These are actually kind of nice, especially against the bigger bosses that have larger hitboxes. And it's also good against very high mob density because you just get free damage out of it, which is nice. Berserk Ripping is also really cool. When you deal direct damage with Berserking, inflict the base damage dealt as additional bleeding. This one is actually, it's not the most build defining, but it is the most Paragon defining, because being able to cause a bleed gives us a lot of really cool options for Paragon modifications. And so getting Berserk Ripping in the build means that you're regularly causing bleeding without having to spend the points in the skill tree to unlock bleeding. So if you're looking at an aspect to get quickly, Berserk Ripping is super clutch. It's very important. For our main weapon, our two-handed bludgeon aspect of the Dire Whirlwind. Whirlwind's crit chance is increased for each second is channeled up to a max of 40%. So remember when we have crit damage and crit damage and crit damage, especially even from this crit damage from the high rank technique, here we go. More crit chance up to a high amount. The longer Whirlwind is channeled, we get more value out of that. You can also run Aspect of Limitless Rage. This one's super fun. For each point of fury you generate while at maximum fury, it grants your next core skill increased damage. And it does seem, based on testing, that this applies to the entirety of the Whirlwind. They may end up changing that, or in my testing, I missed something and that didn't seem to work that way. But based on the testing that I had for limited access of the game, it did seem to be that way. So things like Limitless Rage can be really valuable as well. For jewelry, Bold Chieftain's aspect is a big one. Whenever you cast a shout skill, its cooldown is reduced by a certain amount per nearby enemy up to a maximum of 12 seconds. You can also run this on your amulet for the 50% bonus, for the reduced bonus, just because the amount here isn't as important, because you have 3 shout skills in this build. You're going to be constantly reducing the cooldown on it. And when you're surrounded by enemies, 12-second reduction is going to be half, if not more, of all of your shout skills. So it's actually really clutch. You can imagine how much value you get from this. Echoing Fury is another big one. Your shout skills generate fury per second while active. So think about that synergy there for a second. We have 3 shout skills while they're active. This one's 6 seconds at base, 6 seconds at base, and this is 6 seconds at base. But remember, duration's increased by 24% for Booming Voice. There goes the duration. And we have 3 of them. So when we activate this and we get 4 fury per second per shout while active, you have 24% increased on top of 6%, which is what, like 7.2 or something like that? Or those 7.2 seconds times 3 times 4, that's how much fury your shouts will generate on top of the ones that already give you fury, right? Like things like Rallying Cry already gives you fury when you activate it and increases your fury generation. And with this legendary, gives you fury. You're just generating infinite amounts of fury. It's ridiculous. Edge Masters works great for this as well. Skills deal increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the maximum benefit while you have full primary resource. If you have the build fully fleshed out and running, you're going to be at full fury most of the time, and so you get some nice damage increase coming from that as well. We already talked about the unique here on the glove slot. Let's look at the other slots. Typically, armor legs is more about defense. Helm is defense / some utility. And then boots is usually utility or movement speed of some kind. That's the most common thing you'll have from that. That's why these are more important. Starting with the boots, I think becoming injured while crowd controlled grants you unstoppable. This helps you a lot, especially when you're leveling or trying to get your paragons fully maxed out. You can drop this eventually and just get like movement speed for crits and things like that. Movement speed while unstoppable, which is really cool. But I like this one because it makes the build just feel better. If you ever get CC'd, you get instant unstoppable, which is really nice and gets you going again, because the worst thing is if you don't have your unstoppable proc coming out from your shout and you get CC'd for any reason. This build is a momentum-based build. It can slow you down, stop you. You lose all your bonuses, you lose all your fury, you lose the whirlwind. This one kind of just protects. But it's not necessary. It's something that I think just feels better. There's other options if you want to pick that up. For legs, Aspect of the Crowded Sage is nice. Anytime you're running a melee-focused build that's in close range, heal per second for each close enemy is always nice. It means we can heal ourselves and keep ourselves healthy. We don't really have any fortify or healthy bonuses in this build, but there is a baseline overpower, and it's nice to have extra healing, which means that you can be a little more carefree when you're moving through mobs, getting the extra damage in there. For chest, I like each point of fury generated while at maximum grants fortify. Just like Aspect of the Crowded Sage, the healing we get from Invigorated Fury, all of that just makes us tankier and more survivable, which is really cool. And lastly, this one I think it's really nice to have. There might be a swap here where you might put in more defense or maybe even more damage if you need it. This is super fun for mobbing, but I think you can get by without it. It's just a fun one to have in here. Grasping Whirlwind just makes it so Whirlwind just sucks in mobs every couple seconds, which means that when you're mobbing and even when you're attacking the elite or a boss, if there's ads nearby, you just can spin on the boss and all the ads get sucked into the boss and you're just doing tons of damage. Super fun, recommend that one as well. Lastly, let's go through the Paragon board. This is my first pass on a Paragon board for the Steel Cyclone build. It has plenty of synergies. I think it works great for the build, but again, I've made 40 builds for this game at this point, and that's without even reaching level 100, so there's going to be some adjustments, I'm guessing, but I didn't want to leave you without a path. You're going to unlock Paragon when you're playing. If you're running with a Whirlwind build of Barbarian, I wanted to at least go through the extra effort to give you a Paragon board that you can rely on, that is decent and pretty good. And then as we get more information and we test things and we go into leaderboards and we're learning things about the game, some emergent gameplay comes out, we'll be able to make adjustments to this. But let's go through the general synergies here for the Paragon board in general. For stats, stats are different for every class. There's a baseline value of stat for each one of the four, but based on what class you are, they do something different. For Barbarian, strength and dexterity for this build are going to be the winners. Strength gives you skill damage, dexterity gives you crit, willpower is resource generation. We don't need resource generation at all, unless you really wanted to run with an amulet that consumes fury for defense, or even if you just wanted to get extra healing from fury spent in general, but you don't need willpower here. We want skill damage and we want crit chance in general, and there's also some nice percent damage bonuses we get for getting break points of dexterity in the build. So we're gonna come up here, we're gonna pick up our physical damage, we're gonna make sure we get enough strength to proc these as well. And the first glyph I would get is Exploit. For every 5 dexterity purchased within range, you deal increased damage to vulnerable targets. If you have at least 25 dexterity in here, which you do, these are all dex nodes, and there's even the 7 dex nodes in here as well. An enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds, and it doesn't happen more than once every 20 seconds per enemy. So if you do run with the lucky hit here, Pressure Point, you have other bonuses that proc it, and then you also have the Exploit rune, you can actually get some pretty high uptime on vulnerability. You also want to grab the physical damage, and then on our way to the next part, we're looking for dexterity and strength when we can. The first board that I would look at adding is going to be Carnage. It fits this build so perfectly. Carnage and Warbringer are some of your best boards, and then you want to pick up some extras just for bonus points, but those are your 2 best for this build specifically. We're going to come over here and we're going to get damage while berserking. Remember when we mentioned getting berserking procs from having Warcry, as well as activating your Wrath of the Berserker, as well as causing different things with your techniques and different bonuses. All of those can be really nice, but this is where everything really comes together. So berserking duration, 7.5%, damage while berserking, berserking duration, more damage while berserking. All of that should make very clear sense. Damage reduction from close enemies. We're in close range all the time, which is really good. We also want dexterity and damage while berserking. And for this cliff node, I like running the Marshal. This gives a bonus to all magic nodes, which gives us damage while berserking, damage while berserking, damage while berserking, damage reduction as well for defense. And then the additional bonus, as long as you have 40 strength inside the area, which is easy to get as long as your glyph is of a sufficient level. After casting a shout skill, which we do 3 times, the active cooldown of every other shout is reduced by 1.2 seconds. So you can keep proccing those and you can infinitely get, remember we have the bonus where when you activate a shout, you get damage reduction for 5 seconds. You can keep that going forever, baby. You can just let that one roll because you can just keep reactivating shouts as much as you want. Coming over here, damage while berserking, damage to elites, damage while berserking, all makes sense. And we're cut over to our second best board, which is going to be Warbringer. We're going to come down here and we're going to pick up maximum fury and percent life. You could probably get to a point where you don't need the max fury. The reason I like running max fury on builds that run Edgemaster's aspect is that based on your increased max generation, you'll be able to get more value out of that, especially if you run expectant, which I don't have in this build. The aspect of the expectant is also really nice for this. Base skills increase damage your next core skill, and the more you can spend, the more you can get damage off of that scaling, which is pretty cool. So all of that comes really nicely together. We're gonna grab the damage and we're gonna cut over into Warbringer. We got the maximum fury. We're gonna come up here, get more maximum fury, fury on kill. You can play this by ear, decide if you need the fury or not. I just think it's a nice value. By the way, the legendary node for Carnage is gonna be while berserking, crit strikes increase your attack speed, and that stacks up. The legendary node for Warbringer is every 75 fury you spend, which we're spending constantly, gain 12% of your maximum life as Fortify. So more defense, which is super nice. We come down here, and for this node, I like picking up the Wrath glyph for every 5 dexterity. Core skills, the only skill we have, dealing whirlwind damage. It deals increased damage, increased critical strike damage, and the skill that critical strike generates. So when you do a core skill that critically strikes, it generates fury, which is just more ways to build fury and spend fury in that build. You also get physical damage in here. You get some defense in here, which is nice. You can also get some extra stats. For every 5 dexterity, it just makes the crit damage of your whirlwind that much better. For extra bonuses, I like adding Decimator coming in from the left because there's just a free easy node here, which gives damage to vulnerable targets, and you get some armor out of it. You can also come up here and grab damage from vulnerable enemies, which is indirect damage reduction, and you get vulnerable damage as well. And for this node, I recommend running Ire. There's actually a couple glyphs you can put in this spot. I think Ire is great though. For every 5 strength in range, you deal increased damage while berserking. The better our gear gets, the longer we'll be berserking. And while we're berserking, we get 10% reduced damage from scary enemies. We like that. That's super good. On the right side of Carnage, I put Blood Rage. You can actually get benefits from this. Legendary node, killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant berserking. Remember, we do have the Berserk Ripping legendary, which whenever you deal damage while berserking, you cause bleed. If we have high uptime of berserking and we're hitting constantly and often with high attack speed, we'll apply bleeds. And then when we kill an enemy with bleed, it grants berserking. While we're berserking, we cause bleed. While we're bleeding, we cause berserking. While we're berserking, we cause bleed. You can see how that goes. Nice synergy there. And then we're gonna come up here and we're gonna grab damage while berserking, easy pickups, and that is gonna be your maxed out Paragon board with as much synergy as we can get. There's obviously gonna be some variants here and some changes, but I wanted to give you at least a board that was good, reliable, and you can use it. So if you don't wanna think about Paragon or you're overwhelmed by Paragon and you're playing this build, you're not left in the dust as you move along. But that is the Steel Cyclone build for Barbarian. If you got value out of this video, do me a favor, leave a like down below, comment down below for the algorithm. Help me out with that. Come hang out with me on my live stream. I'd be happy to meet you and chat with you. And that's all I got for today. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.